So we are here today, must be November 1st,
Right.
2020. And we're starting, this is the first of a couple, we don't know how many we'll get done, Christmas series of interviews with Nan about stories that I wanted to get recorded for you guys, for Nan. And I think we need to kind of rewind to start at kind of the beginning of the story, which would be the story of Nan and Grandpa and how that thing all came to be. So let's go back in time, even before that, and start 1938. Nan is born, Mary Crocker, the sixth of six children to John Crocker and Mary Hallowell Crocker. So I'll let Nan take it from there. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up. I know when you were born, you lived in Princeton, correct?
Right.
Right.
I was years old when we moved to Groton, so I grew up.
What was Grandpa doing in Princeton? What was his job?
Fiscal chaplain at Princeton University.
Okay.
And also coached the 150 football team.
Okay.
Well.
Okay.
And they lived right on the edge of the campus in a house, and the stories are quite hysterical of Shar and Peg. They used to, they had, of course, all the boys' dormitories were right across the street, so there was a lot of back and forth.
Right. Oh, I bet with those two. Holy cow.
They were troublemakers, but they also, that's where Peg and Charlotte did so much figure skating, and Grandpa learned to figure skate too. I mean, he thought that was great fun, so he did that with his girls.
Oh, fun. So then when you were two, Grandpa took the job
as the headmaster
of Groton. Okay. And at that point, Groton was just a school for boys, correct?
Right. And
okay.
It was whole tenure. He wanted it to be co-education. You actually wanted to be more parallel education like Milton was, but he was a man ahead of his time. He really was, and that wasn't going to fly for a while. So, but he made a lot of changes in Groton. I mean, he took over from the founder of the school, and he was sort of handpicked by the rector, Endicott Peabody, who was Cotty's, let's see, remember Cotty Peabody?
I do.
Cotty Peabody's great-great-grandfather.
Okay.
Or great-grandfather, I guess. But, the trouble, one thing that was hard is the rector didn't leave Groton. He built a house right on the edge of the campus and was there, used to have lunches and dinners oftentimes in the dining room. And, it made it a little difficult for Pa. But you can get that history from reading that book that Spatzi distributed to everybody about the early days of Groton. But I grew up, I was about 3 years old, and I was a little older than 2 when we moved. And, I don't remember a lot of my tiny years there, but I can remember certain scenes of, we had a huge chestnut tree in the back behind the house and that kind of thing. And there were a lot of friends that this one boy, David Noble, whose father was also on the faculty. I have a marvelous picture now in the downstairs bathroom of he and his English sheepdog and myself in one of the old carriages that was in the stable, the Groton School stable. We used to, as little kids, used to pull it all around. We pulled it out of the barn and we'd give the dog a ride, and we'd all, it was really great fun. Those were the things that I remember the best of when I was little.
Right.
And then, you see, I started school in the Groton Public School, and then I went to Concord Academy as a day student, which was only about a half an hour away when I was in the, was I in the 4th grade, 5th grade, I guess, 5th grade. And we'd take the train, the Boston and Maine Railroad from Ayer, Massachusetts, which was right next door to Groton, to Concord, and then we'd walk about a mile to school. And that was in the days when most of the engines of those trains were the old steam engines. There was a combination of locomotives and steel engines, but I loved the old steam engines. They were great fun. And we became big buddies with all the conductors. There were about 3 or 4 of us kids, faculty kids from Groton that traveled together. And
oh, nice.
That was in the days when you could stop and get a snack before you got on the train to come home, unless someone picked us up and drove us home. You could go get a candy bar for a nickel.
Oh.
You know,
It's a wonder you have any teeth in your head.
I know, I know.
So tell me a little bit about, and then we'll get on to Milton, but tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up, because you're 4 years junior to Say and Sarah. And so you were at Groton by yourself a number of years, but particularly you two as the youngest, growing up in a boys' school and living right on campus, how that whole thing
Well,
went.
that was, I mean, actually, see, Sarah was, yeah, and it's hard to remember. There's a big gap in my memory from when I was little, or really the impact of it, except one thing I do remember is a little girl. I don't know if you remember Freddie Gwynn, who was, he was he was one of the Munsters.
Mm-hmm.
He went to Groton and was a great, he was, gosh, I think he was at least as tall as Dad. But there's a pencil drawing here in the kitchen that he did for Ma and Pa, but he was my big buddy. I was about 3 years old. Oh yeah, he and Freddie Gwynn and I were big buddies when I was little.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about
I was a tomboy that, the thing I wanted most, I'll never forget it, when Pa said, okay, you can go to the Groton School secondhand store, and I wanted to buy a football helmet. Don't ask me why I wanted to buy a football helmet, but I did. And the old-fashioned football helmet, with the flap ears and that kind of thing. Well, I thought I died and gone to heaven when I was allowed to do that. But anyway, so because I was pretty much of a tomboy, and Say taught me as a young girl. Boy, she taught me how to throw like a boy, because we'd play hardball catch outside behind the schoolhouse, and she'd say, "You're not going inside until you stop throwing like a girl." And boy, so I learned I can't throw anymore. My shoulders all screwed up from it. But that's where that was one of my claims to fame as a kid. I could throw a baseball or a softball like a boy.
I can attest to that. I've been on the receiving end of some of that fire.
Well, I can't do it anymore. But anyway, that's how I learned.
Okay,
and
so
of course went off to Milton, and I was alone there for 4 years. You see, I was the only girl, and I think it gave Ma and Pa gray hairs. But I was used to a lot of boys being around. I mean, if a telephone call came and Pa was in the school dining room and not eating at home, I'd have to go walking right up to the headmaster's table in front of 200 boys and give him a message, and that was commonplace. It didn't bother me at all.
Right.
But it got to be a distraction, because as I got older and then the boys were closer to my age and whatnot, I think they were mighty glad when I went off to boarding school.
I bet they were. So then tell me, when you're at Milton, and the summer must have been between your sophomore and junior year, or your junior and senior
year?
Okay. I think we broke up again. Can you say that again?
Between my junior and senior year, when I went to Rawson Creek.
Yeah.
The summer of '55.
So how did that come about? How did you learn about that?
Because I had some cousins who were at Milton, and also my dear friend Hannah Higgins. She and I there was a fellow in the class ahead of us who lived right next door to her, Sid Harwood, and he'd been to the ranch, and it was all those connections were everything done by Bart's mom and dad, by Stephen, Elaine, Granny, and Papos. Was all the advertising was word of mouth, and that's how we heard about it. And Steve didn't have room for us for the whole summer, but he said, "Come on, you can come for the month of July, but if you want to come a couple of weeks early, because you can't stay the whole summer, come ahead." So we did, and we went early with Polly Ray, because Polly Ray and a bunch of her friends from Windsor, who was our big competitor in the girls' sports, had been there the summer before, so they were old timers, and they went early as well. So we didn't arrive with the whole big bunch of summer kids. We got there early and had, so it was, and of course, the airport in Denver was a little different than it is now. It was a tiny, small airport, and Mike and Dad and Uncle Mike came and picked us up in the old Suburban, and it was quite an adventure, I'll tell you.
So how did your initial meeting go? How did that?
Well, it was very, I thought, boy, look at these guys. They all they both had cowboy hats on, of course,
Of
just to
course they did.
play the part. But when they're button-down collar shirts and Levi's, but you were kind of starstruck at that age. I mean, I was 17, it was.
What did
It
you
was
spend the summer doing? Did you did work on the ranch, or
Oh,
you?
we did everything. We did a little bit of everything. There weren't any hay fields, but we, peeled a lot of fence posts. We cut timber. We did, we didn't actually do the trimming, but some of the older kids were doing the trimming, and we would, I can remember peeling a lot of bark off poles for corral poles and cleanup jobs, and we did ride. They had a bunch of horses, and we did all the things necessary to keep the place going, just as we did at Big Four and so forth, but minus the hayfields.
Oh, gotcha. So then, did you hang out with Dad a lot that summer, or did you?
A little bit, but I was, we were Hannah and I and Cindy Taylor, who is Cindy Siebold, who is a dear friend of mine as well. We had sort of special passage, and Dad and Uncle Mike and John Bowen lived in this tiny little old cabin right behind the main house called the Shrine. And I don't know if you remember that the bookcase that Dad made you all. The original one is hanging in our hall here, and Papos made it out of boards when they tore the shrine down, and the old square-headed nails that were, they were all,
Yeah.
So that's where it came from. But we were allowed to go into the shrine with these older guys, and, they tell us all these
And how much
stories.
older? So you were 17, and
I was
Dad
27, and he was.
scandalous.
Hell no, but and John, they were all, and Sid Harwood lived in there too. He was part of the crew. So there were oftentimes, 7 or 8 of us in the shrine. Oh, they'd fill us full of stories, and they'd tell some of these dirty limericks just to see what kind of reaction the teenage girls from New England would have. But what I found out later is Beth Wiggins, who was her father was John Follansbee, the artist.
Right.
And she had, she was a very close friend of Granny and Papos's. And she told me many, many years later, she said, the summer you and Nancy Higgins went to the ranch, Steve said, gosh, you don't suppose amongst some of these girls there's somebody that maybe my sons would ever be interested in, do you? And she said, well, Stevie, she said, I'll tell you, we'll wait and see. But she said, there's one that might work. And she was right.
So fun. So you went back, tell us how, so you went back to Milton for your senior year, and Dad went back to Princeton for his junior year, right?
Well, no, it was his junior year. Yeah, right. No, that's right. That was right. And I'd go down to Princeton, which was in the 50s, was, for a boarding school girl to go to a men's college on a weekend was fairly, advanced, fairly liberal. And, but I stayed with the Bowens over in New Hope most of the time. Sometimes I stayed at the Colonial Club because, see, Dad was an officer in the club, and he lived in the club. So he could move out and I could use his room. But anyway, it was quite an experience because you're a junior in high school. Well, I was a senior in high school, but still, it was a new experience, to be darn sure, to be thrown into a college environment.
I bet. So then you came back to the ranch the next year?
No, I didn't. It was, quote, the summer to stay away from that older man without it being imposed. But anyway, there are a lot of things. I went to typing school and I don't know, but it was not, but anyway, it didn't seem to do much. Didn't seem to didn't slow down the
Didn't deter his interest?
no,
Okay.
no, it isn't. And the good thing was that, between my senior year at Milton and my freshman year at Smith, I never saw Dad lose a crew race, ever,
Oh,
never.
wow.
And that was fun. The best one for him was a young man that I you know I went out with a couple of times, but it was never very serious because he knew I had a different interest. But he was the same oar that Dad was on the Harvard crew. When Harvard would lose to Princeton, he had to give the Princeton oarsman his shirt, which was the tradition in crew. And boy, it really burned him up to have to give Dad his Harvard T-shirt, his Harvard shirt.
Oh, so fun. Well,
Right.
that's a good, so we're gonna pick up, so you went to Smith 1 year or 2 years? 2 years?
2 years. 2 years.
2 years, and then you and Dad got married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So we'll pick up there next time, guys, but that's probably long enough for one session, but that's kind of the story of how Nan came west and
Right.
kind of getting there, and
Stories from during that period, when it was fun. It really was fun. There are lots of details that were amusing. Someday we can fill them in, maybe.
I'd love to. Maybe we'll pick up there next time.